This is the second part of my review of Pierside by Emily Spahn. Part 2 reviews are less direct reviews of books and more a deeper look at some of the themes and ideas in a book that I feel are worth discussing. As a result, this video will contain spoilers. You can check out my spoiler-free thoughts on Pierside as a whole in Part 1 here. Guns are a common object to include in literature for a variety of reasons, and one of the most common uses is as a symbol of strength and power. As physical objects go, there's very little that's as directly connected to power as a gun can be. They are representative of the ability to take another human's life. It's no surprise in Pierside that the MacGuffin everyone is after is the gun, a magical artifact that, in the hands of an immortal Elevatus, can end the life of another Elevatus. The Elevati are themselves symbols of power, and with the gun granting power over the powerful, the book suggests that the one who controls the gun controls the world. However, what's really interesting about the gun isn't the symbolic nature, but rather what the novel has to say about what power itself means. In settings that feature things like magic powers and immortality, typically the base representation of power is magic itself. It would be fair to assume that's the case here, but in reading Pierside, it becomes clear that magic has very little to do with power in that basic sense. Magic bestows a level of power, but it is not itself the unit of power. Instead, power is simply the ability to make a choice. This is at its clearest and most blatant with how the gun relates to Ezzy and what it means to her. At the beginning, she has no desire for it, instead using it as a somewhat empty threat to try and get Christopher to behave. Also at the start, Ezzy is a woman without options. She feels trapped by her past, in a literal sense from the need to stay hidden from the followers of God, and also emotionally from the weight of the secret she's hiding from Maddie, who she loves and knows loves her in return. Many options are cut off, putting her in a position of disempowerment. As the story progresses, what agency she does have is stripped from her until she's completely disempowered, bound and tortured by the followers of God. At that point, she does want the gun, which represents a singular choice she still has the ability to make, to end her own life. However, once she does have the gun, things change. The actual events of the story have plausible reasons for this change, but on a symbolic level, ownership of the gun removes Ezzy's desire to commit suicide. And then when she loses the gun, it becomes her driving goal again. It isn't simplistic, as she struggles with her suicidal tendencies for a lot of the running time, but in the text when Ezzy has the representation of agency, she's not really planning to kill herself. When that agency is in someone else's hands, her priority is to be dead, either by her own hands or someone else's. Where Ezzy's arc and the relationship to the gun the only things to go off of, personal agency would still be a dominant theme in the book, but the theme permeates everyone and everything. The angel's magical ability to compel others into acting as she wants is on the nose, but it's telling that her biggest personal failing is how she reacts when something doesn't go the way she wants it to. Every problem she faces is a direct result of reaction to her usually unchecked personal agency being challenged. Ian's quest for revenge is driven by the realization of how he was controlled. Christopher's worldview is a warped representation of the past actions of others and a dismissal that people actually have the ability to change. Even Roy, who is mostly a bystander through the novel, follows a personal arc after Christopher shoots his friend. He's confronted with the fact that he's been a passive participant in his own life, letting others dictate what he did, and reacts by choosing to act for himself. Outside of the characters themselves, most of the conflicts in the book relate to agency as well. It could be argued that all conflict is about agency on some level, as even, say, two kids arguing over which Ninja Turtle is better is about attempting to limit the other's choices. But in Pierside, the connection to choice is far less nebulous. At the start, despite them both being comfortable, Ezzy and Maddie's relationship is deeply, deeply flawed, and these flaws are built on the back of the secret between them. The secret is not only trapping Ezzy though, it's also trapping Maddie. Maddie is aware Ezzy is hiding something, but she doesn't know what, and that lack of information restricts her ability to make decisions. Likewise, Ezzy's paralyzed by the unknowns of what would happen if the secret came to light. The lack of communication cuts off options for both of them. They can make fewer meaningful choices based on how much they've hobbled their relationship from the start. And in fitting with the thematic core, their arc together is about amending this problem. By the end of the story, they're both equipped with enough understanding of each other and of the truth to begin empowering themselves and each other. It's a bit of a mess to get there, with mistakes on both sides, notably from them trying to make decisions on the other's behalf, but they do get there. It might be tempting to reduce this thematic core to a simplistic championing of choice, but Pierside goes a little deeper than that idea, even beyond the obvious issue of what happens when two proactive characters want conflicting things. That issue does come up a lot in the book, with characters taking sides and changing them left and right, and everyone wanting the gun at some point or another. But inside those conflicts, the novel also explores the limits of personal agency in different ways. This concept is delved into the deepest through Maddie, a character who on the surface is the least fettered. She has her ability to choose artificially restricted by Ezzy's secret, but her personality is bombastic and impulsive, which makes her representative of active choice. This results in it being all the more tragic as a reader when she's controlled by the angel against her will. Were she a less proactive force, like Ian at the start of the story, her will being subverted would be less viscerally disturbing. However, we end up seeing another side of things too. Maddie being as proactive as she is leads her to making half-cocked decisions. She isn't necessarily foolish, as she is aware that Ezzy is better at making plans than her, though she is aggressive enough to not always follow those plans, and that impulsiveness often gets her into trouble. In that way, Maddie is a cautionary tale for the other side of agency. Where a cooler head would come in handy, she willfully charges forward and makes things worse. After charging ahead and paying for it by coming under the angel's control, she's eventually brought back to her senses with help from Ian and Roy. And that would be enough for a cautionary tale on its own, but Pierside doesn't stop there. Confronted with everything, Maddie finds she can't emotionally deal with the consequences of her actions and retreats from responsibility, inside of bottles and back under the angel's control. This is shown to be a recurring problem for her. The angel notably never commands Maddie to drink, and while she can't help a number of her actions during that period of time, she turns to alcohol and sex as an emotional escape from the situation. When she can help her actions, the access to drink is what drives her back to the angel, and in some ways giving up control of herself is a relief. Even after escaping the control for good, dropping the alcohol proves more difficult. And, most emotionally destructive and impossible to live with of all, is her killing of Hal. As much as the book paints Hal as a truly evil person, as justified as Maddie feels in her actions, it's an act that haunts her. Maddie might be aggressive and impulsive, but there's a fragility to her, and her unchecked personal agency has deep, lasting consequences. This touches on a core, related idea in the text. Personal responsibility is an intense preoccupation for many of the characters, and their relationships with taking responsibility shapes their personalities and actions to an extreme level. One of the key disagreements between Ezzy and Maddie, which unintuitively leads to them mending bridges, is Ezzy's responsibility for the actions of the Saint of Death. In Ezzy's mind, each and every time she was forced to kill was her fault, a moment of personal failure where her ability to endure was broken and she made the wrong choice. Maddie, on the other hand, doesn't think that Ezzy made a choice at all. Imprisoned and tortured to breaking point after breaking point, her actions weren't made because she wanted to make them. And for Ezzy to claim responsibility for them isn't something that Maddie finds morally fair. And in that disagreement, Maddie finds the ability to forgive Ezzy. In this, the two ideas come to a head, and the book presents an ethical conundrum between them and becomes about that conundrum. It would be easy to argue that the point of Pierside is to question where the line is drawn between choice and responsibility. It's telling that at the end of the book, the rules that Ezzy outlines for the Elevati and the rest of humanity at large digs into this idea. Her rules are limiting agency for both sides, but the way in which they're limiting is centered around consequences for either side attempting to exert control over the other. Elevati not being allowed to control humans, Elevati coming to the aid of those who are suffering from humans, and an all-or-nothing punishment for breaking these rules implicitly places responsibility on the Elevati to police themselves towards the ideal of no one forcing anyone else to act against their will. In this, it poses a theory on where personal agency ends, at the point where it begins to encroach on the agency of others. This thesis gives the book a decidedly individualistic, libertarian sensibility. I wouldn't argue that the book is making a political statement. I think that would be reading into things too much. But the ethical tenets of individualism and libertarianism make up a central pillar of Pierside's themes. Whether or not someone ascribes to the philosophies, there's a lot going on under the hood and a lot to chew on. And one of the most interesting aspects of Pierside is that it goes out of its way to not actually answer any of its own ethical questions. Like the debate between Ezzy and Maddie over who is responsible for the actions of the Saint of Death, neither side really wins the argument. The answer to those questions are personal, and just like with Ezzy and Maddie, the debate doesn't end up being about who is right or wrong. It's about learning to live with your personal answers and reconciling yours with the answers of the people closest to you, which I think is a more poignant idea than a personal answer could ever be. That wraps up my thoughts on Pierside. I'll be back with another 2-part review soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Until then, let me know what you thought of Pierside. And if you have any books you'd like to see me review, let me know. I'm always looking for new books. Anyway, that's it for this one. TTFN.